some specific reasons why it's hard to learn. It's not that it's extremely difficult. There's just a lot to it, and there's a lot of new syntax, and there's a lot of things happening under the hood that can be kind of lends itself to a lot of mysterious things happening that you don't know why. When you click this button on in your UI, all of these things happen in a row, and you don't really see those things happening in the code that you wrote. It's in the code that React and Redux teams wrote. So because of that, because there's so much happening under the hood, it's hard to conceptualize how things are working. So I'm going to try and take away some of that mystery today. And learning about reducers and the dispatch function yesterday actually takes away a lot of that as well. What I will say is, to get comfortable with Redux, it just takes a lot of practice. You're not going to feel comfortable today. You're not going to feel comfortable tomorrow. Even by the end of the week, it's still going to be pretty foggy. I would encourage you to be using Redux as much as you can over the next couple weeks. As you finish Unit 3 and go into Unit 3 build week, give yourself the opportunity to learn this library by using it over and over again. Really, this is one of the most important subjects to learn by repetition. Okay, we are going to learn the full library today, how to build a complete project with Redux, because we have this many objectives today, because we can't just go halfway on Redux. You would have a project that doesn't work. So today, we're going to focus on all the new syntax that you need to learn, and less on how everything works. And that also kind of leads to the frustration of this subject, because we can't just teach it all up front. If we could, or we can't break it down and look at every individual piece day by day. We have to teach it all up front. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a working project, and that wouldn't help us. So today the focus is to go through the syntax and start learning the syntax. And then as you practice more and more, then how it works and why the whys behind it become more apparent. So it's not the way we like to learn. I get that. I understand it's frustrating. I just want to be upfront with you to let you know that that's the nature of learning Redux. Okay, here we go. So the first objective is just what Redux is and the problem that it solves. So let me do this, jump over to Slack. What is Redux? And we'll talk about the problem it solves in a second. So in the thread right here, what is Redux? Who can help me out here? Good. Simply, it is a state management library. I like it. Ooh, a predictable state container for JavaScript apps. Oh, I was going to say that came from here, but that might actually come from Redux docs. Yes, predictable state container for JavaScript apps. I love it. Looking at the docs. A sophisticated state management library. Oh, hello. Yep. It's not a component library. We don't have Redux components. It is a state management library. An online library. Okay. Awesome. We're going to get to this in the next question, which is, you know what? Let's just do this. Why is Redux? That's your question. Why do we have Redux? Why is Redux even a thing? What is Redux and why is Redux? Ooh, good. Yes. Redux helps us manage state globally rather than locally inside a component. So far you've learned how to manage state locally in the component itself. With Redux, we're going to be able to manage state globally. Predictability, I love it. Redux helps you write applications that behave consistently and are easy to test. Allows you to have all the state in one place and allows children to pass props to parents. Good. Predictable. Update state in a predictable way. React is messy when it comes to managing state, especially when you get large amounts of state. Did anybody say anything about a lot of state? Let's see. I'd like to buy a lifeline. Go for it. We are, what's the one? Ask the audience. We are in a lifeline right now. Okay, I want you to think about this. Redux was built as a way to help the Facebook team manage their increasingly growing and complicated state for Facebook. So as you can imagine, Facebook started out in the United States just for college students and started to grow globally. They opened it up to people outside of college and eventually became the ginormous social media platform that it is today. So can you imagine managing all the state for that kind of platform? It would get really, really difficult really quickly. So Redux helps us to manage state at scale. Now, at scale is a phrase that you'll hear quite a bit in the technology world. Basically, it just means when your application grows and grows and grows. When you have a ton of users. So Lambda School at scale would look like probably 2,000 or more students in one cohort. So that's what at scale means. So when you get to that point, when you start to scale up, you need a better way to manage your state. So let me do this. I'm going to share a whiteboard here. Where's my whiteboard? Whiteboard, there we go. Okay, I'm going to drag it over here, resume my share. Good. So far, we have learned how to manage state like this. Let me start over here. Here's our app component. We've got some children components like so. These are usually views or routes. So I'm going to say routes. If we were using React Router, then this level of components would be our routes. And each of those components have children components. And those components have children components. And we start to get this increasingly complicated component tree. Down and down and down and down, right? So without any other kind of state management system, if we are using just component level state, then this is what happens. So let's take this component right here. And let's say this component has some state. And we'll say this component has state X. And we're passing that state down as props. So it can be displayed in this component right here. And then it needs to be displayed over here, so we pass it down as props like that. And then we get this component over here that has its own state. State Y for its components like this. So we pass it down as props so that its children components can render that state. So let me try and demonstrate what issue we are trying to solve here. What happens if we take state X and we say, well, we need to display state X here. We need to display state X here. What happens is there's no way to share state sideways. It has to come top down. So we do what's called lifting up state, where we move this state to be managed by this common ancestor component. So now this component up here is managing state X. Well, by the time we lift up all the state that needs to be in multiple component trees, then this state list has become really large. So this component here, which shouldn't manage any state, is now managing a lot of state, a lot of global state, because, undo, there we go. Because we just have a lot of state that needs to be shared throughout our entire application. So managing state at the component level, managing global state at the component level is not very efficient and could lead to a lot of bugs, leads to a lot of it makes it hard to maintain. There's just quite a few issues inherent in this kind of architecture. So what Redux does is it brings the state management outside of React. So this is Redux store. Okay, so instead of managing our state here, we're going to take away state X. But we still need to display state X in the components that we have it listed here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to let our Redux store manage our state. Let's do this. We've got state is going to be a single object. And we've got property X here. And what we're going to do is Redux is going to share that state with any component that needs that data. We're going to call this connecting. We're going to connect any component anywhere that needs global data to the Redux store. And we're going to handle any state changes through Redux. So we'll come back to this drawing, to our whiteboard here, and we'll talk about how to update our state object here inside the Redux store. But the first thing that we need to learn is how to create this store and how to connect our React application to this Redux store. So let me share my screen again. So the next objective is doing exactly that, learning how to create a Redux store and connect it to our React application. So go ahead and jump onto the code sandbox that we have for today. And that's what we're going to do first of all. You'll notice that this kind of picks up where we left off yesterday. We've got our title reducer here that lets us update a title or toggle the editing. So we can come up here, say new title, and that's running through our reducer. However, that's using the reducer hook, and we want to use Redux rather than component state. Use state and use reducer are both React hooks that let you manage state locally at the component level. But we're going to manage all of this state here through Redux. So let's go to the index.js where our app component is. And we are going to create a Redux store. So the first step is we need to add two libraries, React Redux and Redux. So let's add a dependency here, React Redux and Redux. Go ahead and add those two dependencies, React Redux and Redux. Okay, then we're going to create a store. And the way we do that is just by creating a variable here called store. Then we're going to use a function from the Redux library called create store. So you can actually just type out create store and it will auto import from Redux, or you can import it from Redux yourself. I'm going to put this up here. I like to have all of my library imports at the top and then components and CSS below that. All right, so we're going to call this function. So you should have const store equals create store. You should have Redux or create store imported from Redux here. But we're getting an error. Expected the reducer to be a function. What reducer? We haven't done anything with the reducer yet. Well, as you can see here, we have to pass a reducer into our create store function. So that's why we're getting this error. We didn't pass a reducer in. And so it's telling us that our reducer is not a function. Well, lucky for us, we have a reducer right here, title reducer. So let's import our title reducer. From /reducers title reducer. And then let's pass that into create store. Okay, while you're doing that, I'm going to add these steps. Step 1, create Redux store and connect it to our app. We'll even say React app. Okay, let's see what we just created. I'm going to console log this variable here. So if I open up my console, then I get this object here. with 4 things on it. We've got store.dispatch. Okay, we like the dispatch function, right? Store.subscribe. Subscribe is, we won't ever use subscribe. We'll use, there's a couple other methods we'll use to connect our components to the Redux store, and under the hood, subscribe gets called so that those components that are connected, anytime the Redux store updates, those components will see those updates happen in real time. Here's a function, get state, and then get state is good. It helps us see what the current state is in our Redux store. And then replace reducer is another one we don't have to worry about at all right here. So we're gonna focus on dispatch and get state. Well, let's do this. Let's call get state or .get state. Let's see what our state is. Current state. Oh no, it's undefined. Yikes, that's not good. Let's go see what is happening to make our current state undefined. Well, the store that we are console logging comes from this here. And the only thing that we've created here is the reducer. So something's going on with this reducer that's making it so our current state is undefined. All right, so we've got this console log in place where we're console logging the current state and the action. So the action, when we call this function here, when we call create store, Redux under the hood is going to dispatch an action to set up our store with this initial state object. So look at this. Here's our action. It just has this random type. In fact, you can refresh this page and you'll see that these characters here are always going to be random. So if you refresh, we get X5WNN. Refresh again, we get T357, 3547L. So every time that Redux calls create store, it's going to invoke our reducer and pass in a random action. The reason for that is it doesn't want to land in any of your cases here. What it wants to do is it wants the reducer, this action, to fall all the way down to the default and just return your state object. So what is state? Well, if we look up here, state is being passed in to this function as an argument. We're console logging that state object, but it's undefined. So Redux is doing something like this. Under the hood, it's saying call title reducer with undefined. It literally passes in undefined like that. Then it passes in type. What is this? At, oh, double at Redux /init s dot random. So under the hood, Redux is doing this. Well, why the heck is it passing in undefined? They purposely hard-coded undefined into this first reducer call. The reason for that is we are going to set up what's called a default parameter for this state parameter. So this is one of the biggest differences in your reducers when you're using Redux versus the use reducer hook. The reducer hook, you just pass in your arguments like you're used to in JavaScript, state and action. With Redux, we have to set up a default parameter like this. So when you set up a default parameter, anytime that state is undefined, anytime that parameter is undefined, it will fall back to whatever you set up as the default. And you set it up like this: state equals initial state. Aha, look at that, current state. There we go. So let's walk through that again really quick, because that was a lot of some advanced JavaScript to throw at you. So we set up our store by calling create store and passing in a reducer. Redux, under the hood, is going to call our reducer, pass in undefined, and pass in some random action type. When our reducer sees that state is undefined, it's going to fall back to the default parameter, which is this object right here. So now, instead of state being undefined, it's actually this object right here, and we can see that in this console log. Then, since the action type is random, we're not going to go into any of our cases. We're going to fall all the way down to the default. The reducer returns our initial state object, and now our Redux store is set up with our initial state object. So we can come back here and we can console log our current state, and our store is set up with our initial state object that we set up in our reducer. So step one, we created a Redux store. Now we just need to connect it to our application. So we're going to import a provider component from React Redux. So Redux, I don't know if you know this, but Redux is actually a library for any JavaScript application. It doesn't have to be for React. It's mostly used for React apps, but you can use it with vanilla JavaScript. You can use it with Vue, with Angular, any JavaScript application. So there's going to be some pieces that we import directly from Redux that are specific to the Redux library. But there's this other library called React Redux that gives us bridge pieces. So when you want to use Redux in a React application, there's some helper functions and components provided to us by a second library called React Redux. So provider is one of those bridge pieces. So we're going to import this React component from React Redux. And we're going to come down here to where app is being rendered. We're going to wrap our app component inside this provider component that we just imported. And then this provider component takes in a prop called store, and we pass our Redux store into our provider component. So go ahead and import provider and wrap your provider component around your app component here. And I'll save my code sandbox. And let's do this. Open up the project there, close this down. And we'll split that to the right. All right, so the last thing before we do questions, let's open up our React Dev Tools here. And you can see that your app has been wrapped inside these new components. So if we look at the provider, we can go to we can look at our store, and we can see that our provider component is receiving that store object as a prop. And then this React Redux provider component also receives the store here. And then this subscription, which we don't really need to know about. This just helps our React app know when the Redux store has been updated, so that the components can re-render appropriately. All right. So step one, we are done with step one. Create the Redux store and connect it to our React application. Let's pause here for questions. So go ahead and add questions to Slido. We'll look at questions and take a break. All right. I have yesterday's Slido up. Let me get today's up. Bring it over here. And present mode. Okay, what would React DOM.render look like if we needed to use routes? Ooh, good question. Would we put provider first or routes first? I would have your routes go inside your provider. So this would be router here, and then it would be wrapped like that. Good question. Okay, is Redux to be used on all applications, big or small, or is it only used in large applications? Some people use it in small applications. You'll find that there's a lot of boilerplate code, a lot of code you have to write just to get it up and running, and you'll see that today. So most people don't use it for small applications just because it's so much extra code for there's just not enough gain for all the extra code you have to write to implement it in a small app. However, that being said, you should practice it on small apps first so you can get used to the data flow. You can get used to what I call the Redux loop. All of that. It's really good to practice those in small applications first. Okay, great question. I'm going to push both of these through. This one's anonymous. Optional name. Okay, we need your names on these. That's why these didn't get pushed through, and I just pushed it through. So I'll answer this one, but please, if you want your question to appear in front of me, include your real name. Const store is a convention. Yes, that is correct. You can name this whatever you want, but every example, everywhere, every app you see will have const store, and then pass the store into your provider. Now, this is not a banana word. This is up here. You can name this whatever you want, but this one, the provider component is expecting a prop called store. So you have to call this store, but you can name what you pass into it anything that you want. All right. Let's go ahead and take a break, and I'll see you back in 5. Okay, come on back to your seats. Make sure to get your cameras on unless you've told your TL that you have kids running around behind you or something. All right, so we have completed our first objective. Actually, our first two objectives. Let's jump down and see what our third objective is. The connect function. This is where a lot of the under the hood black magic of Redux happens, is inside the connect function. So the connect function is used in components. So if we go to, let's open up our title component to connect our components to the Redux store. So I'm going to close that down. Okay, I've got my title component here that's using local component state with useState and useReducer, but we want to connect this to Redux so that this part of our state is controlled by Redux and not by our reducer hook. So I'm going to take away this console log here, and let's just comment out this line here, our useReducer line. Because we want all of this state, our editing and our title state, to come from Redux. All right, as I'm working with Redux, I'm referring back to this initial state object to know what the shape of my state is. The values are going to change, right? As soon as we click this icon, then my editing will go from false to true. As soon as I type in a new title and click on my button, then the value for this title is going to change. So these values will change. However, looking at my initial state object here tells me what properties I have available in the Redux store. So my Redux store is this object right here. So I've got title property and an editing property. So we're going to say, we're going to take away this import. We're not going to import our state or reducer. So let's remove that. We can remove useReducer. We're going to do step 2 here. Step 2 is connect the component to the Redux store. So we're going to import the connect function from, all right, think about which library do you think this is coming from? Is this only in Redux, or is this a bridge piece between React and Redux? This is a bridge piece from React Redux. You don't know that. We haven't talked about what connect is, but since you know that we're connecting our component to our Redux store, then that's how we could infer that connect is coming from React Redux. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to the bottom of this file where we're exporting our component. Give us some space here. And we are going to wrap the component export in the connect function. And we're actually going to call connect twice. So we're going to go like this. We're going to call the connect function once, and then we're going to call it again like that. This isn't something that we're going to go over at Lambda School, but if you are curious about this, this pattern is called, it's called function currying. So you can curry function calls like this. So just a little FYI if you want to look that up later. All right, we pass the component that we want to connect to the second call. First call, take in a function and an object. So let's go down here to our first function call. We're going to pass in a function and an object. So I'm going to pause here, go ahead and import connect, remove the pieces we don't need, and then come down to the bottom. You're going to call connect once and pass in a function and an object. Then you're going to call it a second time and pass in title. Technically, you're not calling connect twice, but if you're curious, go look up function currying, JavaScript. All right, now this is the cool part. This function here is going to return an object. Function returns any property on the returned object gets added to the component props. Isn't that cool? Watch this. Let's test that out. Let's see if that's true. Maybe Dustin's lying to us. Let's add a property here called new prop and type in your favorite color. My favorite color is blue. When you hit save, it's going to drop everything down, but that's okay. All right, so this function here, again, returns an object, and any property on this object will get added to the props for the title component, for whatever component you pass in here. So let's go check this out. State is not defined. Oh, let's clean up some of this. Just remove all of our on clicks. Let's just get rid of all of our errors here. And let's just say props.editing and props.title. And then don't forget to pass props in up here. Okay, pass in props up there, change state.editing and state.title to props.editing and props.title, and take away the two on clicks. Then we shouldn't have any more errors and we can test this out. Okay, that looks good. Good. All right, so let's see. I'm going to click on my title component. Let me refresh the code sandbox here. Title. There we go. New prop blue. Ha, I did not lie to you. You thought I was lying. Shame on you. I would never mislead you. All right, so why did we do this? Why does this even matter? We don't need a new prop called blue. We need our title and editing, right? We need props.editing and props.title. So since those are the two props we need from our Redux store, so let's go put those into our object here. So we need title, title, editing, setup is false. So this should work where we have props.editing is false, and we should see this title. We should see some title in our component. There we go. So refresh my page again. And there we go, editing and title, good. But not good. We're still hard coding these values. We want to get these from our Redux store. So watch this. This is really cool. Inside Connect, under the hood, Connect will call this function and will pass an object called state to this function. What is this object called state? Let's go to our console. Hey, look at that. That state object is the state we're looking for. So we have state.title has the string we want, and state.editing has our Boolean. So if we have state.title and state.editing here, that means we can replace the string with state.title. We can replace this Boolean with state.editing. Now let's see if we get Dragon member list. Yes! It's working. It's working. It's so cool. Okay, think about this. This state object that's being passed into this function that we pass into connect, this state object is the state object from our Redux store. So we can take state.title and add it to the props for our component as props.title. Now, this gets a little bit confusing. Let's take away this console log. The naming here gets a little bit confusing. If you want to be, one trick that I learned early on when I was learning React is to take the things that I have control over naming. So I get to name this prop and I get to name this prop. So sometimes I'm not really sure which title is which, right? So sometimes I come in here and I say title on props and editing on props. And then I have to come up here and say props.editing on props and title on props. And just changing that name lets me map and create a mental model for what this object is right here. So if you need to do that, that's totally, totally fine. I did that all the time when I was learning React to help create that mental model of what all of this was. For this component, I'll keep this here. For our next component, we'll go with the more traditional naming of title equals state.title, editing is state.editing. Okay, last thing here is the function is normally abstracted out of the connect call and named map state to props. So normally what you'll see with the React Redux application is a variable here called map state to props, and the value of this variable is this entire function right here. So I'm just going to Command X and Command paste. So the function that we had written right here, you can just move to right there and then pass map state to props into the connect function. And then usually this is layered like that. Now again, map state to props, you get to make up this name. This is a banana term, but everything you'll see online, every app you work in that is using Redux will call this map state to props. So do yourself a favor and call this map state to props so that it makes sense when you're seeing the tutorials online, questions on Stack Overflow, etc. All right, take a second to make sure your code looks like this. Let's add questions here for the connect function. And we'll do questions for a few minutes and then take our next break. Okay, time box questions here for 5 minutes. And let's take a look at these. Well, let's pause the timer real quick because this is bugging me that I didn't set this up. Give you 300 characters for your questions. And let's just do 6, turn that off, and let's do mountain. Let's do mountain today. Okay, whew. All right. All right, what does the second argument in connect do? Wouldn't you like to know? We're gonna get to that in just a minute. That will actually be in our next part of this guided project. So hold on to that question. That's coming up. I think this is kind of from yesterday, but when we use forms, we are keeping the state of the inputs in the local form and pushing it using payload. Yes, 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 yes. Any state, well, let's do this. Let me bring up my whiteboard again. So you'll notice that, let me get a different color. You'll notice that this component tree here is managing the state for Y, state Y, and is passing that state down as props. this would be a situation that, because we're passing it so far down, it might be good to move state Y into our Redux store. Wow, that's really hard to see. Or you could keep it local here. But let's take a situation like this, where let's have this component. Well, let's just have state Z. The only place that state Z is being used is right here. Now this could be a form. Form is your most common situation that you'll see this in. So our form state Z is right here. We're gonna give this component state. We're gonna make this a stateful component to manage that form state. We're not gonna put that into Redux. That would be too much extra work to just handle state for this one single component. So the state that we put into Redux is state like state X, where it's in multiple places throughout our application to be able to manage that state in one place, even though it's displayed all over our application. And what's cool about that is every single app that, or every single component that now renders state X, whenever we change state X inside Redux, those components will re-render and will stay up to date with our state up here. So if it's local to just one single component, then just manage that state on the component level. I think it's okay to move state Y to Redux instead of passing it down from level to level to level all the way down to this final component. So yeah, I would move state Y to Redux, but I would leave state Z in this single component. Okay, that's a great question. Let's see, computer sound, share my desktop, turn down the noise. I'm going over all the steps real quick just for review. Yeah, let's do that. We've got about 1 minute left, a little over 1 minute. So step one, we created our store by calling create store. We've passed in our title reducer, and we wrapped our entire application, our entire component tree inside this provider component so that our app has access to the store. Then inside our component that needs some of the data being stored and managed by the Redux store. So our title component needs this data right here. So inside our title component, we imported connect, and we wrapped our component inside connect like this. And using map state to props, we were able to get this object from our Redux store to this right here. So we're going to map our state from Redux. So here's our state from Redux. We're going to map that state to the props of this component. And connect takes care of that. So by using connect, we now have two new props called editing on props and title on props. And we can display that inside our component. All right, Corey says, how is Connect able to manipulate state? Can you show the path it's taking? So right now, Connect is not manipulating state. It's just providing or mapping our state to our props on our component, in our component. So hopefully that review we just did kind of helped out with that question. The provider, we don't really see what the provider does right now. And the connect function is actually going to use this store right here to call store.getState. So that's how the connect function, when it calls map state to props, that's how it can pass the state tree into this function, because it's calling store.getState. So we actually don't have to call, we don't ever have to call store.getState manually. We let connect do that for us. Okay, awesome questions. Let's take a 5-minute break, come back for the next section. Hey, come on back to your computers. Get those cameras on. All right, I've got a short little quiz for you. Yay for pop quizzes. Jump to Slido and go ahead and answer the survey. There's just 4 questions there. So go ahead and answer those questions, and we'll see through this survey if we're ready to move on or if there's anything we need to cover. This is required for your attendance to be counted today, so make sure you're taking this survey. Oh, 34 people finished. We're about a third of the way there. Okay, we're just at 59, 60. All right. If you have not finished the survey yet, please finish so we can make sure to mark you as present. Okay, so what function allows you to create a Redux store? So that happens here in our Redux. This function right here, create store, helps us to create that Redux store. That's what sets up our entire create store, our entire Redux store. Good. Looking through the answers, it looks like most people got these correct, so that's awesome. What gets passed into the first call of connect? So let's go to our component where we're using connect. Let's see. Why are we on that one now? What gets passed in? Okay, here we go. What do you pass into the second call of the connect function? So that is our component that we're connecting to the Redux store. So whichever component we're connecting, that gets passed into the second call after connect here. Now again, we're not technically calling connect twice, but that's just what we will say for us to reference this part right here. Okay, the third question, what gets passed into the first call of connect? A function and an object. That function is usually named map state to props and abstracted out here. And then our object right here, which we're going to learn about in just a moment. And finally, in map state to props, what is the argument that is passed in? That's our state object that we get from our Redux store. Okay, really good job. All right, ending the poll. Okay, so we've completed our first two steps. The next step, step 3, is going to be the actions, the events that occur in our application to update our state. So that goes right along with our objectives here. We already know what actions are. We learned that yesterday. Actions are the same from the use reducer hook to Redux. Same concept, same rules. You have to have a type property. And you can, if you need to pass data to your reducer, then you use a payload property. The new part here are action creators. Action creators are simply functions that help us to create actions. So what does that mean when a function creates something? Well, that simply means it's going to return that thing that we're trying to create. So when we say that an action creator is a function that creates actions, you could also say it's a function that returns an action object. Let's go write that down. We're going to set up a new file here, a new folder called actions. And inside actions, let's say title actions.js. So an action creator is a function that creates actions, aka a function that returns an action object. So what are some of the actions that we want to take place here? Well, I'm going to move my action file over here. I'm going to move my reducer down. So we already know what actions we want to take place in our title component. We want to be able to click on this icon and toggle our editing status, right? So let's create a function for that. Const toggle editing is a function. And again, this action creators are functions that create actions or functions that return action objects. So this function is the action creator. The returned object is an action. And we know that actions have to have a type property. We already know our type here. So let's grab this string and we'll copy and paste it there. So for our toggle editing action creator, we want it to create or return an action that will, when it's dispatched to our reducer, will toggle our editing state. So how do we use this action creator? Well, we're going to export it out of this folder, out of this file, and we're going to import it into our component. So we're going to import toggle editing from /actions/title actions. I'll give you a second so you can catch up on your action creator here and import it here. Okay, looks like most people are done typing. Okay. Now we have this function available to us in this file. So we could simply call this function here. We could just say toggle editing. And you know what, let's do this. Let's just console log up here, function running. So if we added an on-click back to our icon, and we pass in this function that we've imported, let's go to our application, and let's click that icon. Hey, our function's running, but nothing is happening. We're not actually toggling our editing state. If we were, we would see our form here with our button. So the way to fix this is to actually dispatch the action that's being returned, right? Remember yesterday we ended with something like, something like this, dispatch, and then our action. That's the word I was looking for. So yesterday we had this. We had the dispatch function being called, our action object being passed in here. Well, we don't have our dispatch function available to our component, right? So we have to remove that. We've got this function here. The way that we can wrap this function in the dispatch function is by using the connect function again. So instead of calling our function directly in our UI like this, what we're going to do is we're going to take this function that we've imported. I'm going to remove it out of my onClick. We're going to take this function we've imported, and we're simply going to pass it into this object. Oh, that didn't work. Toggle editing. So let's add some more notes here. The object that is passed into connect takes in any action creators that need to be called in this component. So any action creator that we need to run some kind of action, to dispatch some kind of action here, we're first going to pass it into this connect function. Connect will wrap, warp, will wrap the action creator inside dispatch, and we'll add an enhanced action creator to props. So we pass our action creator to this object and connect. This is, by the way, this is the same as doing toggle editing. Toggle editing. Okay, so this is just the shorthand for an object. So objects usually look like this, key value pairs. If they're both named the same thing, then you can just list it once and it creates the key value pair for you. So some JavaScript shorthand there. So we pass this into connect. Connect is going to do something like this. So let's say inside connect. Connect is going to take that action creator, wrap it inside the dispatch function, and call that action creator. Now, when you're learning JavaScript and when you're learning React as a JavaScript framework, it's really important that you think about how JavaScript evaluates expressions. What I mean by that is this is a JavaScript expression. We're calling a function and that is going to do something, right? Calling that function returns an array, which we capture and destructure with these two variables here. This is a JavaScript expression. JSX is a little confusing because it gets transferred into JavaScript objects. But all of these things, if we come over to our action creator, this is a JavaScript expression. This return statement is a JavaScript expression. So right here, thinking about that, when we call toggle editing, we are evaluating a JavaScript expression. And you have to think in terms of JavaScript expressions and what that expression evaluates down to. So when we call toggle editing, when we invoke this function, that function is going to return this object, right? So this JavaScript expression right here is basically going to evaluate down to this object. So connect is basically doing, oh, what did I do? Connect is doing this right here. It's taking the object that our action creator has returned. It's calling dispatch and dispatching an action, just like we saw yesterday. So even though all of that happens under the hood, when you understand that inside Connect, this is what's happening, it's a lot easier to understand what's happening under the hood. One second, let me tell my kids to talk quieter. Benny says hi. Okay, so all of that happens under the hood. Just know that even though you don't see dispatch being called here, when we call this function from props, under the hood, it's going to call dispatch for us, and it's going to pass that action into the reducer function. So let's do it. Instead of calling the function directly, you don't ever want to call an action creator directly, because then it doesn't have the chance to be wrapped inside the dispatch function. Instead, pass it to connect and call it from props. So now when we click this icon button, this little icon, it's going to dispatch this action right here. That action gets passed to our reducer. It will go into this case, and we're going to toggle our editing state, which will update our editing on props to true, which will show us our input and our button. Are you ready? Magic. Yes. It's so cool. All right, let's walk through this one more time with a new action creator. Let's set up our action creator to update our title. So I'm going to create a function that I'm exporting, update title. And this is going to return an action called update title. But this action needs a payload, right? So whatever our title, we want to name our title, we need to pass this a payload. Call it new title. Uh-oh, we have a function here, and we've got some data that we need that we don't have access to inside this function. So we don't have access to this piece of data here. So whenever that happens, that just means that I need to pass that in as an argument. So any action creators that return actions that have payloads, that payload will come from the arguments. So let's see how that works in our component. We're going to take update title. We're going to import update title. We're going to pass update title into connect. Now it's added to props in our title component. So I can come here to my button and I can invoke props.update title. However, I need to pass in new title text. So event handler, we're invoking a function. That means we need to wrap it inside an anonymous function. So now my button on click looks like this. We're calling update title. We're passing in new title text. That gets passed to this function here, which will return this object, which means that connect is going to dispatch this object. That gets dispatched to our reducer. We see that we are dispatching the update title action. We have a new title being passed to our title, and we're setting our editing to false. So let's try it out. New title, click our button. Yes, there it is. We got it. Whew, that's a lot of stuff. A lot of things happening. All right, I'm gonna leave this here. Let's see, we've got that. I'm gonna leave it on our JSX here so you can see how we're calling those functions. Just know that they're imported above and that they're passed into connect down below. So take a minute to update your component to look like this. Make sure you have your action creators. While you're doing that, I'm also going to set the timer to add questions so we can take a third break today. So let's go ahead and start our question timer now. All right, let's take 5 minutes for questions. So if you were catching up on the code here in your code sandbox, let me restart that and pause it. If you're catching up on code and you have a question to ask, please go ahead and type that question in now. Okay, we'll start questions. Why is that second button in an arrow function? Yeah, why do we do this instead of this? So inside any event handler, on click, on change, anything like that, when you pass something into that event handler, that JavaScript expression gets evaluated right away. Okay, so doing this, the JavaScript engine says, all right, here is a function definition, and it passes it, it gets it ready to be called. However, if we do something like this, the JavaScript engine evaluates this when the component first renders, and it will actually call this function right at the very beginning. Now, what does this function do? This function calls this action creator, which calls our reducer, updates our state, which updates props. So our editing and title state are being updated here. That updates our props, which causes this component to re-render. When this component re-renders, it will call this function immediately, which will call our action creator, call our reducer, update our state, which updates our props, which causes this component to re-render, which calls this function. So now we are caught in an infinite loop. So if I were to refresh this page, okay, that should have aired out as an infinite loop. Props, update title. Yeah, that should have. So to avoid that infinite loop that we just described, anytime you need to pass a function and call that function inside an event handler, you have to wrap it in an anonymous function like this. So this is a function declaration, just like this is. And this is a function invocation. You don't want to invoke a function inside an event handler. You want to pass in a function declaration. What is that warning? Ooh, good question. Switching from controlled to uncontrolled inputs. So right here, where is that warning? When you start typing, a component is changing from an uncontrolled input. So this input started out as uncontrolled to be controlled. So how do we control inputs? We control them with state. So let's go to our input. We see it's being controlled by new title text. What does new title text get initialized as? Nothing. So it's as if we didn't have value here, which means this is an uncontrolled component. However, as soon as we start typing, new title text is no longer undefined. It now has a value. So we now are controlling this input. So anytime you have an input, you should initialize it at least with an empty string, unless you have something that you want it to be initialized with. And then we no longer get that warning. Okay, good questions. Let's take a break, and I'll see you back in 5 minutes. Okay, come on back for the last section. All right, so let's review what we have done here. The objectives we've gone over are to explain what Redux is and the problem it solves, create a Redux store, and connect it to a React application. So we did that in the index. This was set up a little bit in an older version of Code Sandbox, so they didn't have app.js here. So let me just do this real quick. I'm going to create an app.js file like your projects will normally be. And so I'm going to remove my app component out of here and into app.js. I'm going to export default app. And let's import React, import title. Well, we have these imports in index.js. So let's import all of these to our app file. Okay, so this is what our app looks like. Our app component will be just the component, whatever imports we need. If you're setting up routing, you could set up your routing here. And then our index.js files where we set up our store. So then I'm going to import my app component and render it here. Then I'm going to set up my provider around my application. Okay, so we set up our store. We called create store, passed in our reducer, set up our store. We imported provider and passed our store to the provider. Next, we learned how to connect React components to the Redux store. So in our title component, we use the connect function and the map state to props function to connect our state, our Redux state, to our component. So our Redux store, which looks like this object gets passed to our map state to props, and then we add new props for our component here. So now we can use that data via props in our component, in our connected component. Then we talked about action creators and writing action and action creators to describe state changes. So inside our actions file, we created these action creator functions that return actions. We imported those to our component and passed them into the connect function so that we can call those functions from props. And connect is going to wrap whatever object gets returned from those action creators. Those will be wrapped inside dispatch, which means when we dispatch an action, we know what happens. That action gets sent to the reducer with our current state, and it will update our state object however we have determined it should be updated, which is the last objective, write reducers to respond to actions and update our state. that objective we basically learned yesterday, but it's an important step in our Redux flow. All right, when I am creating a Redux application, of course I start with my create store function here and set it up. But then from then on, I go through what I have coined as the Redux loop, where I am working on a component. I realize that there's some state that I need from Redux. So I connect my component and I grab that state. Then I keep working on my component and I realize that there's some kind of event that's going to occur inside my component that will update, that needs to update my state. So as I'm working on my UI, I run into that situation. I go to my, I create an action creator for every single event that in my UI that needs to update my state. I create that action creator, I import it, pass it into connect, pass it into my event handler or wherever it needs to be called. Then I go to my reducer and I create a new case for that new action. So my flow, I'll do this inside app. Dustin's workflow. Work on a component. Connect that component if needed. When an event needs to update state, create an action creator. Typing is hard. Import the action creator and pass it into connect. Then build a case in the reducer for that action. So that's the workflow that, and then you just repeat these two steps here. Once you have your action creator built and your case in your reducer, go back to your component and keep working on your component until you run into a new event that needs to update your Redux state. All right, the project today is really fun. It's pretty tough. This is a tough project, mostly because of the state of the shape of the state that you'll be working with. So if we go into the source and we look at app.js, you'll see that app.js has a variable called state. You're going to create a reducer and you're going to move this entire object to that reducer file as the initial state. And this state is pretty complicated. You've got a car object that's nested inside state. You've got a features array that's nested inside your car object. You've got an additional features array inside your state object with nested objects. So as you are working on your cases inside your reducer, if you need to move this object into your features array, it's going to take a lot of, you're going to really have to flex your JavaScript muscles to figure out how to add it to a deeply nested property inside your state. So this is a really fun JavaScript day. Remember, every level you go down, you're going to use the spread operator. So in your reducer, you're going to spread in state. Then if you need to change features, then you need to, it would look something like this. Let's just say we have a case for add new feature. You're going to return your state object, spread in your state. So you get all of these other properties, but we need to change car and we need to change features. So we need to change car. Car is an object. We're going to spread in our old state.car. We're going to update features. Features is an array, which means you either spread in state.car.features and add a new feature, or you use something like state.car.features.map or .filter. One of those array methods. Okay, so you're going to have a lot of nested spread operators going on here. Cool. All right, that is it for today. If you have any other questions, we didn't really learn anything in that last part, so I can stick around for a couple minutes if you have any questions, but yeah, we did just have a question time right before our last break. So feel free to jump out and head to lunch, and I'll see you tomorrow, or add questions to Slido if you have any other questions with Redux. Okay, how would we feel about maybe taking 10 minutes to hook up a little bit of this into Redux? Would you want to do that? Spend some time during lunch to go over that real quick? Okay, I got a head nod and a thumbs up. That's enough for me. Let's do it. By the way, basically the only reason I made this guided project was to use this really cool icon, dragon icon, because I think it's awesome. All right, so the idea here is we can take this and we can say, Talia, you are now a dragon member, and add someone to our list, and also toggle the dragon status for our dragon list, our dragon members here. So we can add new dragon members and we can toggle their dragon status. So let's go to our dragon list component. You don't have to follow along here. I'm going to just go through this kind of quickly. I think it'll be important to see this happen fast. Then you see a better, like, higher view overview of what's happening. So this will be really good because this starts basically how your project starts, where you've got a state object that you need to move to your reducer. So let's just take all of this state and add it to our reducer. And we're going to remove this state. Uh-oh, but we moved some form state out of this function. So let's actually put that back. We just want to move members over. Okay, so we no longer have this .state.members to map over. That is now coming from our reducer from Redux state. So we're going to import connect from React Redux. So we can connect this component to our Redux store and get this members list back to our component. So we're going to come down here. I know this is a class component, but that doesn't really change anything with our connect function that we did. It only changes how we reference using the this keyword. So instead of props.members, we're going to say this.props.members. So, all right, that being said, let's go ahead and add our connect function here. We're going to create a map state to props. That takes in a state object. It's going to return an object. We're trying to get members back to our component. So I'm going to add a members property to my props and pull its value from state.members. Then I'm going to pass this into connect. I'm going to pass in my object. And now I have my connect set up. Just a reference, map state to props shorthand. If you want to do some fancy schmancy JavaScript here, you can do this. You can destructure, well, first of all, we could take away this explicit return. And since we're using an arrow function, we can do that. So that shortens it up a little bit. Then we can destructure our state object here, say members, and all we have to do is that. So we could shorten this even to a one-liner. If you get another property in here, then it would probably be you'd probably need to drop this down like that. So there you go. There's map state to props, all shorthand. They're the exact same, just using some ES6 advanced JavaScript techniques to make it a lot shorter. Okay, but I digress. So we have map state to props. It takes into the state object, returns an object, and we've got state props.members now available to our Dragon List component. So we're going to say this.props.members. We're going to map over these members here, and that should get us our map. Perfect. So now, instead of our Dragon members being in state in our Dragon List component, they're no longer here in state, they're now here in props, coming from our Redux store. So let's do this. Let's add on this H4, let's add an on click to be able to toggle the Dragon status of our members here. So now we've run into an event that needs to update our Redux store. I'm actually going to create a new action folder for this. Normally I would create a new reducer, but we don't know how to use two reducers in the same app, so we're going to go over that tomorrow. So we're just using this one reducer for everything, but I am going to separate dragon list actions.js. I'm going to separate my actions file here. Const toggle member. And I'm going to return action with the type toggle member. Okay, let's export this. I'm going to import this into my component. /actions /dragon, dragon list actions. Good. Okay, then we can take toggle member, add it to our object down here in connect. And now when we click on this, we simply call this.props.toggle member. All right, so that will dispatch my toggle member action. So in my reducer, I need a new case for toggle member. So what do I want to do here? Well, I need to update the members array. I'm not adding a new member, so I need to find one single member here and toggle the dragon status for that member. So I'm going to use the map function to do that. So I'm going to say state.members.map. Look at one member at a time. Then I'm going to say if, and do some pseudocode here before we connect this up correctly. Member, call this clicked member. If it's the clicked member, and I'm going to return a new object for my member and just toggle the dragon status to the opposite of the old dragon status. Else, I'll just return that member untouched. Oh, what happened here? This all needs to go right there. Okay, so let's talk through this real quick. So I click on an H4. I click on one of my dragon members, and that dispatches my toggle member action, which means that this case will run. So I'm going to create a new state object, spread in all my old state properties. I'm going to update my members property from my state object. Members is an array, so I'm going to map over my old array. .map creates a brand new array. And I'm going to look at one member at a time. If I find the member that I clicked on, then I'm going to toggle their dragon status. Otherwise, I'm just going to leave them alone, add them back to the array without toggling anything. So how do we find the member we clicked on? Well, normally we would have an ID here with all our members. So we would just say if member.id equals the clicked ID, but we don't have that. So the next best thing is probably use the index. So inside map, I actually have access to the index of the member I'm looking at. So the index just follows each iteration. This will start at 0 and will iterate up through each iteration. So now I'm going to say index if that equals the clicked on index. Okay, so now I'm inside a function and I don't have access to this data. I can't add a new argument here like I normally would with a function. So how do I pass something to a reducer? Use the action payload. All right, so my payload needs to be the index of whichever member I clicked on. So I need to go back up to my action creator. I need to add a payload. So that's simply going to be the index of whatever member I clicked on. Oh no, now I don't have access to index here. Well, I'm just going to pass it in as an argument. So where am I calling toggle member? So I can pass the index in as an argument. I'm calling toggle member right here. And look, I already have access to my index. Perfect. So wrap that in an anonymous function. I'm going to call index. And now, when I click on a member, let's walk through the flow. When I click on this H4, it's going to invoke this function, which is going to dispatch this action. And we're passing in the index of the member we clicked on. So we take that index, we dispatch this action, which brings us to this case here. Spread in our state, loop through all of our old members with .map, and we say if the index of our map matches the payload, then that means that we are looking at the member that we just clicked on. If that's the case, we're going to create a brand new object for that member with a toggled dragon status. Otherwise, we don't care and we're just going to return that member untouched. And now we can do that. Okay, your challenge. If you finish your project today, you can work on adding a new member here and go through that flow if you'd like. All right, any last questions? I'll let you unmute even if you'd like to ask any questions, so you don't have to type it into Slido.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we spread out member in the if else statement there when yeah, right there, that else return member, shouldn't that be spread?
You can if you want to. You can create a new object and just spread in member. But since it's not changing, we only want to use the spread operator when something is changing. So since it's not changing, we don't actually need to spread out member there.
All right, because it's a map anyway, it's still creating a new object, right?
Yeah, it's creating a brand new array, so your component will re-render because it's creating a brand new state object, creating a brand new array. So yeah, we're okay there.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. Alrighty. Good luck today. Have a wonderful afternoon, and I'll see you all tomorrow.